Hi, I'm Jallomoth, curator of all things curious, and the Spirit Halloweens are opening once again, which means it's late enough in the year for me to talk about Goosebumps. In July of 1992, author R.L. Stine would publish his first entry into what would eventually become his most prolific work, Goosebumps, Welcome to Dead House. A short story about some kids who move with their parents into a new place where some creepy stuff starts to happen. I just described to you not only the plot of this first book, but practically every single one of them. This series is very simple and tame in nature. I mean, nobody really dies, but there's always a fun villain of the week and a shocking twist or two. It's an anthology, which means every book follows a different story. I may be underselling it a little, so I do wish to say that these books, while rather dull, simple, and repetitive, were firstly for third graders, and secondly, are surprisingly effective despite their simplicity. At least, for the demographic. The original idea for Goosebumps was a horror series marketed at girls, but once Stine realized a lot of the fan mail that he had received from the first few volumes was from boys too, he decided that Goosebumps should be for all. That was probably a good call, because 30 years later, the books have sold over 400 million copies in 35 different languages, and is unsurprisingly the second best-selling book series in history, second only to Harry Potter. In my videos about Courage the Cowardly Dog over the years, I've frequently ranted about the children's horror scene in the 90s, and how people like Tim Burton, John R. Dilworth, and R.L. Stine are all kings of the genre. Some people in the comments were a little taken aback by me saying that in no means did these guys invent scaring children. And while I admit sometimes I may use hyperbole to get my point across, I still stand by this opinion, and I'm here to word it better. So you likely don't think about it much, but horror is actually the primary genre of thousands of children's stories throughout history. Think about the darker elements of stories like Red Riding Hood or Hansel and Gretel, Humpty Dumpty. This is the cautionary tale, the birth of children's horror. For millennia now, people have been telling stories to children specifically to scare them, as a teaching tool. Scary stories are how ancient children learned to fear wandering off, stranger danger, wild animals, playing where they shouldn't be. Fear is a tool in that way. Now, was R.L. Stine the first to stop using it as a tool and start using it for entertainment? Not by a long shot. He himself was influenced from reading Tales of the Crypt comics when he was young. And let's not forget how influential The Twilight Zone was. But while the man may not have invented the genre, he did happen to popularize and normalize the idea of mainstream children's horror. This cultural shift in the 90s skyrocketed the genre into the stratosphere. What was originally a contract for 6 scary stories with Scholastic quickly spiraled into a 62-book run of terror, with over 10 spin-off book series and a whole rogues gallery of shows, movies, and badass browser games. I do think that if Stine never made Goosebumps, somebody else in the 90s would have made something scary for children that did boom in popularity like this did. But I cannot help but credit the man a little for the explosion in unsettling children's media. God knows how many of my favorite things may not exist without his influence. Goosebumps not only put children's horror onto the map and into libraries across the world, but into the hearts of millions, which 100% had an impact on the zeitgeist of what the late 90s and early aughts were able to do in terms of scaring the hell out of kids. Goosebumps showed that this was not only influential, but profitable. Soon enough, Are You Afraid of the Dark and many other children's horror anthologies started to crop up everywhere, many of which happened to be owned by Stine himself. But even if I happen to hold this guy's influence rather high, these books are anything but equal. Some of these feel kind of inspired, like it wants to maybe say something or portray something special, a real, primal human fear, conveyed to a child by someone with a life's worth of experience just behind the veil of simple text. But then again, a lot of these were also written in less than a week. Luckily for me, I don't have to reread them, because today we're going to be judging books by their covers. The unsung hero behind all of R.L. Stine's fame and success is a man named TIm Jacobus, the illustrator hired to do the artwork for many of Stine's projects. These acrylic paintings by Jacobus are truly what made Goosebumps what it is. I don't think this series would have gotten anywhere near big enough to get a show, or movies, or 400 million copies sold without this art. These images are what got people to pick these books up off the shelves. As a kid, I had no interest in reading all the other horror anthologies or choose-your-own-adventure books in my school's library because they didn't look like this. There is this intoxicating feeling that these paintings invoke, the saturation of the colors, the twisting of the perspective. While young readers are turning the pages of these books, Jacobus's artwork is what's on their minds. There are no pictures in these books, so this visual is your mental basis for the entirety of the Goosebumps world. And that is what made the series so iconic and so very vivid. Because I don't want this to be too long, I'm going to be doing something I've never done before on this channel and make a two-parter. Today, we'll be reviewing half the covers, and in my next upload, we'll be going over the second half. Before we begin, I want to make this crystal clear. I'm not reviewing the books. And I'm not reviewing just the artwork. I'm reviewing the covers. The whole face of the book. I'll be judging these covers based on 4 criteria. 1, of course, the artwork. 2, the background or the color scheme of the book and how well it complements the art. 3, the title of the book. And 4, the tagline of the book and how well it plays off of the title. Obviously, the artwork is the most valuable thing here, so while the other categories will be earning a score 0 through 5, I'll be reviewing the art itself 0 through 10. So if the book has an amazing, alluring illustration, a perfectly complementary color scheme, a radical title, and a killer tagline, it will receive the maximum score of 25. I really don't think I should have to say this, but even though I'm scoring these and trying to make it more of an objective task for myself, this is a very opinionated and subjective thing to do in general. Our lists will likely not be very similar, but I'm hoping that I can make a good enough case for my takes that you could at least see where I'm coming from. If you know me, you know I don't like doing things that have been done before on YouTube, so this ranking system is what's going to separate my cover reviews from all the others before me. This twist on the formula is really interesting because sometimes a great artwork can be held back by some obnoxious color decisions, a cheesy title, and a rotten tagline. That last one sounds stupid and unimportant, but I swear it's not. Kids don't read the back of the book. You gotta hook them right there with the first few words on the front. The best taglines play off of the book's title, creating almost a setup and punchline dynamic. And sometimes it feels like just the colors of the cover itself are fighting with Tim's artwork and not supporting it. So all of this begs the question, which comes out on top in terms of appeal and composition? What is the best Goosebumps cover? But what's the fun in starting there? Why not start with the worst? Just as a little bit of fun, here's every single cover that we're about to review. I'll give you a moment now to look over them with either the rose-tinted glasses of your childhood nostalgia or the fresh eyes of someone who's never seen any of these pieces before. Take this moment to think about which one you think is the best, the most memorable, the most striking. Keep that choice in your head and see how far it takes you. Some of you may have chosen the number 1 best cover, but I reckon at least one of you poor bastards chose number 62. And my pick for the worst Goosebumps cover there ever was is Legend of the Lost Legend, the 47th book in the original run. Seeing this one, you might think, wow, R.L. Stine must be struggling for ideas here on volume 47 of 62. But what really cements this as one of the worst to me is simply the fact that it came both right after and right before 2 of the greatest covers in the entire run. We won't be seeing those until part 2. But this makes it kind of hard to say that Robert and Tim are running out of steam. It's truly just a mixed bag. They never got worse or got better, but they do vary. Legend of the Lost Legend is one of only 4 classic Goosebumps books to never be reprinted and redistributed with new art. Was it because the first try was flawless? Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not trying to throw shade at TIm Jacobus at all. I'm going to be singing his praises later in this video and definitely next video, believe me. But this cover is just not it. It's not as entrancing as the majority of his work. A Viking is kind of hard to make conventionally spooky, but even then, this was not a great approach. I feel like I read practically every one of these books as a kid, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't pick this one up last. The poop brown and highlighter yellow color scheme on this one is really not doing the work any favors at all. And shockingly, the only saving grace here is the blurb Finders Keepers, which I'll grant a 3 out of 5. I hope I don't have to explain to you why Legend of the Lost Legend is a 0 out of 5 title, leaving the book with a final score of just 5 points, and our last place spot. Tied for last place with 5 points as well is You Can't Scare Me, the 15th entry in the series. To describe it in just one word, I'd say flavorless. Firstly, a big part of how cool Jacobus' design ends up comes down to how good the villain of the week is. I mean, we saw that with our first cover. Mudmen are just so bleh. Reminds me of when I would watch Scooby-Doo and the bad guy was just a dude made of goop. I'll take a ghost with a sheet over its head over a gooper any day. And if the art wasn't bland and, well, muddy enough, what's with that title and tagline? You Can't Scare Me and They're Coming For You. That reads like a Goosebumps knockoff. This is some Are You Afraid of the Dark shit. The Korean cover, though. Something I'll probably mention here or there is the foreign covers that have been released for these volumes. Many countries like the UK, South Korea, Japan, France, and more will have different cover art for some, if not all, of these releases. If you're curious as to why, it's mostly just sensibilities. Different places have different media preferences. Many of the UK's covers, for instance, were more toned down to be not so flashy and gaudy as the original US covers. In most cases, I do prefer the original design and wish that they could have transcended the world's borders, and in most cases they did. But hey, we can't win them all. In this case, I wish we could rank the Korean cover, but we're sticking with the OG. And that leaves You Can't Scare Me with 1s across the board. Except for the tagline, because I do like how directly threatening it is. The children yearn to be stalked by mudmen. Coming in at number 60 is Why I'm Afraid of Bees. Again, no harm towards Jacobus, but one, he has kind of a history of uncanny looking animal covers that we'll be seeing more and more of shortly. And two, it's not exactly good uncanny to me, like purposeful horror uncanniness. This is of course just personal preference. I just think this cover comes out looking a bit unfinished, especially in the bee's wings. This was at a point in Goosebumps' life where the output of these books was getting faster and faster, Stine famously writing some of these books in just a few days. So, of course, you've got to imagine that this was hard on Jacobus, hearing he's got a 17th painting to make and maybe only a few days to make it. The title isn't going to get a single point, because you never actually find out why the main character is afraid of bees. He's already afraid of them to begin with, and by the book's end, he isn't afraid of them anymore. Spoiler. Sorry. But the title is not accurate no matter which way you twist it, and that's going to be a common theme today. The tagline of "He's no ordinary human being" is so stupid, but I'll give it 1 point. Something unique about this tagline is that it's the only one in the entire series to be written in black text. That practically useless information can't save this cover from a score of 5, making it yet another contender for last place. It is leagues and bounds more iconic than the previous two though, and I personally felt a little validated when I found out that this volume is likely where Stine started having these books ghostwritten under his name. Now listen, Stine's writing style was never Shakespearean, so I don't really know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I never noticed a real difference as a kid. Matter of fact, most of my favorites came out well after this volume, so do with that what you will. Slappy the Doll fans, I hate to say it, but your goat is the worst. Spoiler alert, but all 3 Night of the Living Dummies will be discussed in this video, part 1, which means none of them really broke halfway. We'll discuss why that is later, but for now, let's just say this third one is definitely my least favorite of the 3. This is just not a compositionally interesting cover, and it lacks many of Jacobus's trademarks. The color scheme is dull. There's too many puppets for any of them to stand out. These books are at their best when they draw your eye to one thing. My eye slips and slides across this like it's covered in grease because there's no focal point. Slappy isn't even centered on the page. Not only are the colors more drab than the ones about mummies, but the perspective that Tim is so well known for is completely missing. This should have been pushed to its extreme. Make this attic feel longer than should be possible. They could have at least salvaged some points with the colorway, but they made it snot and puke colored. This might as well be how not to design one of these books, and I'm honestly surprised it beat out anything. What stands out immediately about Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes to me is that this is a pretty good example of the artwork and the color scheme clashing and leading to a muddier, less dramatic overall composition. The feeling of this piece is greatly enhanced by taking a look at some of the international covers that better understood the assignment. The Italian, Swedish, Danish, and Chinese covers all especially really solve the problem I'm talking about. And you already know South Korea stays popping off. Something I actually really dislike and have since these were released is the 2011 classic Goosebumps release covers. When I saw this, all I could think was, why? Why are you using the PewDiePie font? Overall, this book only ends up 1 point higher than the rest, with our highest artwork score so far with a 4 out of 10. I really think that that's mostly just because these little monkey gnomes are lame. The painting itself is pretty technically beautiful. Those damn flamingos and gazing ball are just a little taste of what's to come with how skilled Jacobus is with light. Reflections, refractions, flares, the man was made to shine. Before we go on, some fun facts about this one are, 1, the gnome on the left was originally picking his nose before Scholastic was like, yeah, maybe don't do that. 2, R.L. Stine says this is definitely one of the books he would touch up if he had the chance. 3, there was once a time in history where you could get this book from a KFC, but only in Canada? That alone is a vivid fever dream not unlike Goosebumps itself, so I love it. And 4, this book also gets a 0 out of 5 for its title, because the gnomes don't take revenge. This whole book was probably written because R.L. Stine just really wanted some sort of revenge of the blank, and couldn't be bothered to write that into the plot or change the homage title once he didn't. Weak. If you're curious as to where I'm getting all this great info on the series, I gotta shout out the Goosebumps wiki. The lovely people who have curated everything there have not only made my job a lot easier, but this video a lot more entertaining. So thanks. I gotta say, this is a very forgettable Goosebumps volume, and I attribute that to quite a few things. It's got what I would call the most bog-standard color scheme in all of Goosebumps history. This ketchup and mustard color combo is on but 2 books in the lineup of 62, but is so iconically bad to me. The other red and yellow cover isn't down here in the first half, but almost was. And you wanna know why? Because red and yellow is an ugly combination of colors. in like 95% of cases. This was apparently the most fun book in the entire series for Stine to write, because it only has 2 scenes in the entire thing. Jesus, what? Art house ass book about a mutant egg? Somebody read this and review it in the comments and I'll pin that shit so fast. By the way, how did this egg fit in the carton? I was about to say that this is our first and worst example of a goop type monster, but I already totally forgot about You Can't Scare Me. I guess that just goes to show how memorable your villain is when they're just a pile of slop on the floor. I almost want to write a story about a goop villain myself, just to see if it's even possible to make such a thing compelling, but at this point, I'm leaning towards that not being the case. I'm not sure if you can tell at first glance, but this is one of the most casually hated and disrespected covers of the entire series, and I don't really know why. I think it's got a lot of charm, despite how low I put it overall. That Beetlejuice-esque perspective twist, those crazy colors, and the fact that this is definitely one of the better animals Jacobus has painted over the years during his career. I was always kind of confused when people put this painting so low on their rankings, when to me, the artwork is kind of the only saving grace of this cover. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10, which is our new highest ranked art piece so far. That orange and yellow color scheme is just so abrasively contrasting the cool blues and pinks of the actual painting that I just have no idea why they did this. The horrid colorway, title, and tagline are sadly going to chain My Best Friend is Invisible to a measly score of 7. My Hairiest Adventure is one of the most famously uncomfortable volumes of this entire series. And I actually know quite a bit about it because it never left my mind, especially with that video on it that JonTron made back in the day.
Did you notice anything last night? Where you rubbed that instant tan on? I mean, like, involving hair? I mean hair, you know, like where you don't expect to see it.
Stop! Are you growing some unexpected hair?
No, are you?
No, are you?
Stop! No, I just thought maybe you...
I what?
Growing hair in weird places.
No.
Remember when YouTubers just kept their mouths shut about their real life beliefs and didn't use their platform as a soapbox for their shitty political opinions? Yeah, me neither. But damn, 2017 was crazy, and I still have never felt the same about this dude.
People like me are supposed to listen to people like you chatter on about this oppression in America. It doesn't exist, dude. It doesn't exist. There's
What
no
are you
oppression.
talking about?
You know what they say, the fall off will be studied. Honestly, it already has been. Even though he still gets millions of views. What are we talking about? Oh, right, the covers, whatever. I like how dreamlike it is, but plenty of other covers do the same thing, but much better. Plus, I don't think anybody should have a problem with My Hairiest Adventure and It Keeps Growing and Growing and Growing, not receiving a single point between them. See what I mean when I said Jacobus wasn't exactly in his wheelhouse in terms of animal art? This looks like a picture of a golden retriever puppy with a wolf mask stitched onto it in Photoshop. The angle of the head and the angle of the face are totally askew. Why is his forehead so big? I almost like how off-kilter it looks, but if this was on purpose, it should have been pushed much further. It's really dark and desaturated compared to the other covers, there's no background, it's just less visually interesting, and the elements that are there are flawed to me. This is reportedly one of Stine's stinkers. He wasn't a big fan of how this book turned out overall, but did specifically say that this cover was one of his favorites. I will never understand this man. I think it's a 7. I wish I could rank the Chinese one because for some reason this really works. I think it's because they moved into all that real estate on his forehead, and it has a much better overall color scheme. So before, we had an example of what I'd call an incidentally uncanny cover, and this is more of a purposefully uncanny cover. Yes, I know they're both supposed to be spooky, but this one dials it up in a way that feels natural for the series and not this off-kilter dark mess. I know I'm practically a certified Jacobus animal hater at this point, but I actually quite like this one. It looks like it's a repainted still from Courage the Cowardly Dog. I personally think that these magic green stink lines coming off of this guy really aren't doing the piece any favors, and it comes out to about a 5 for me. Could be better, could be worse. What really holds this one back is pretty much everything else about it. If you were tasked with choosing some complementary colors for this cover, what would you choose? Probably not this pissy earwax color in a solid off-white. Like, what? A shocker on Shock Street? Really? I get the reference, but at what cost, man? I'll give you a few points because the bad guy is a bug, but if my memory serves me correctly, I think that this is actually like a Disney World animatronic that went rogue or something. I wish that I was able to tell that this was a robo-bug. I feel like that would have given it some much-needed pizzazz. And this sounds crazy, but the wacky perspective may be pushed a bit too far in my opinion this time. Instead of coming across like a creepy fisheye lens like most of the covers do, it almost feels like there was some kind of error in the sketching phase here, especially here on the right side. This building does not look like it's parallel with the road, and this car in relation to the mantis and the road sign, it's just, this is not right. Something here is off and not in a good way. And what's going on with these colors, man? Why are these the two colors you chose to work with? Every time I rank one of these, everything seems to be going good, or at least okay. And then at the very last step, the Scholastics people are like, you know what this artwork really needs? What if we made the color scheme resemble when you whip it out and piss on the sidewalk? These are some rookie graphic design mistakes, guys. And I'm starting to think that Scholastic's entire employee base is entirely made up of colorblind people. Early in the series, Stine's work tended to be, let's say, inspired and not highly derivative. Night of the Living Dummy is Night of the Living Mummy. A Shocker on Shock Street is A Nightmare on Elm Street, etc. It was to a point where I feel like Stine is just doing horror trope bingo. And this cover really feels like it got the short end of that stick. Welcome to Camp Nightmare is just about as close to flavorless as you could possibly get. That's the ice soup of book titles. The artwork has more flair, but not much. As we'll see in part 2, I think there are some really good covers that are just sort of vague general monsters. But on the 9th volume here, I just don't think Jacobus had it down quite yet. It's good, it's actually quite a great painting, but what it isn't is iconic or very evocative. I mean, come on, it's a little camp of horror, even the tagline has to be a reference. I guess pop culture has just always been the way to appeal to kids, so whatever. That doesn't mean I have to applaud it. And at our 50th place spot sits Night of the Living Dummy, which very well may be the most iconic character R.L. Stine has ever created. But that doesn't mean I have to like him. Think about how easy it would be to just... The main reason this got such a low overall score is because I really don't like this painting. Goosebumps is vibrant and warped. This isn't. Jacobus is so good with backgrounds that whenever he throws a gradient back there, it instantly makes it so that the highest score it could possibly receive is like a 4. And that would be if I liked the villain, which I don't. It's got one of my least favorite color schemes, it has none of the aspects that make Jacobus' art effectively spooky to me, and I really don't have much else to say. Slappy is gonna waddle away with a mere 8 out of 25. Okay, so Night of the Living Dummy 2 is checking 2 boxes its predecessor couldn't, which are the excellent perspective and the vivid nature of the painting. But I think I'm still just not overthinking Slappy is not very scary. All of the international covers would have made me piss myself as a kid. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think I used to be afraid of puppets as a kid, but these books were so unscary that they cured my fear. I don't really know how the wider Goosebumps fandom will feel about me really disliking Slappy. I don't know what the people's opinion on him is. Sorry if he's your comfort character. I'm just not afraid of dolls. I want to be scared, Stine. Make a book about a cave that eats people, or do some actual Twilight Zone psychological horror. I want a psychotic Junji Ito cover, or one of those rotting faces from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. If they can get away with that, you can get away with this. Come on. There's a total of 8 Goosebumps volumes that managed to get a 5 out of 5 title. 7 of those will be in part 2. But the first is I Live in Your Basement. This is exactly what kids don't want to hear, which is why it's such a flawlessly scary name. This is the only one with a perfect title that I feel like that aspect of the cover is entirely carrying it. You really couldn't get a worse tagline than "Talk about a monster nightmare." That means nothing. That is the most insipid, watered down, nothing statement. You could literally put "Talk about a monster nightmare" on any one of these covers. The colors of the book are nice, but have no relationship to the artwork. The piece is green, blue, and orange, and the geniuses at Scholastics are like, purple and yellow, yeah. And the reason I have such a harsh score for the artwork is just that it's a lame rehash. Are you looking for cool artwork of creepy stairs? Look no farther than volume 3. Do you want a piece with a creepy goop monster? Why not the blob that ate everyone? I Live in Your Basement is the second to last one of these books ever released, and if this cover is a sign of how the series was going, I'm not too upset that it came to a stop. To be honest though, that isn't really a great way to think about these, because the very last book ever released is one I actually quite like. You'll be seeing it in part 2. Vampire Breath is easily, and I mean easily, with confidence, one of the most forgettable volumes of this entire series by far. But there is something remarkable about it, and that's that it's earned our very first perfect score for the color scheme. I don't know why, but this just hits the spot. 9 out of 10 times I'm kicking myself saying why? Why did you not choose a color scheme that just matches the artwork? But this time it doesn't, and I love it. Most of the time the contrasting colors they chose to beset the image in is doing just that, contrasting it. But this, for the first time, fully feels like this is compounding the artwork and not in direct visual competition with it. Jacobus loves putting these red Converse on these covers. He does it whenever he can. And this is definitely the most front and center example of that. How I Learned to Fly is unique in the sense that this is one of the least horror-oriented stories to ever come from this anthology, and it even has one of the happiest endings to boot. But despite that, the cover is almost anything but unique. It's absolutely serviceable. Not too flavorful, but that's okay. They can't all be home runs. None of them have so far, but I promise you part 2 is going to have a much more optimistic tone. Remember how many of these got a total of 6 points? Well, Ghost Camp gets 6 points just for its art. I really like this painting, even though it has nothing to do with the actual book. The main characters of this story are 2 brothers, not whoever this girl is. At this point, I'm pretty positive that Jacobus had to do these artworks without even so much of a story summary to go off of. I mean, at the very least, I know he hadn't actually read one of these books for years after he began illustrating for them. Stine probably called him up or emailed him and said, "Tim, buddy, I'm thinking Ghost Camp for this next one. You got a week to get it done or you're fired." That's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but it might not be too far off from the truth. I mean, that would explain why the sign just says Camp instead of Camp Spirit Moon, which is what it's called in the book. It was originally called Camp Wanna Run, and come on, why is there no fun allowed in this world? This is so sick and twisted. 9 of 25. F. Be Careful What You Wish For is one of the few volumes I can't say with certainty that I've ever read. I don't even really recall seeing the cover. It's the 12th volume to ever be released, and apparently it's rather good. A man braver than me named Troy Steele read and reviewed all these books on his blog, and this was one of his most glowing reviews, something he doesn't give out many of. I gotta say to all my British viewers, the lot of you, the UK version is insanely excellent and excellently insane. The official cover has always come across a little strange to me. I could never put my finger on why, but once I did, it made total sense. This was not painted by TIm Jacobus. He was on vacation at the time, and so this is one of only 2 Goosebumps volumes to never feature one of his pieces. I was curious as to who painted this then, which brought me to the artist Stanislaw Fernandez, who has a long history of these wildly graphic airbrush paintings. I honestly really wish this guy would have gotten to make a cover for some sort of scary robot or time travel volume, because this isn't exactly his wheelhouse. Despite that, I do like how it looks. I just don't think it's a great Goosebumps cover, if that makes sense. There is a very important difference between a good painting and a good cover. It's like comparing a good piece of art to a YouTube thumbnail. Both can be good, but just because something is technically impressive doesn't mean it's an effective book cover. I'm gonna call the score at a nice round 10. So I got really excited to talk about this one, but that's because I thought we were on Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, not Return of the Mummy. This is the only volume of the entire series that had the gall to reuse a previous cover's background. And it's not like it was just reused like an asset. They can't do that. These are paintings, and this was the 90s. Jacobus had to repaint this background 20 volumes later. And the saddest part to me is that the second time around, it looks worse. But we won't be getting to its predecessor until part 2. Also, in classic Goosebumps fashion, the title makes no sense. Remember Night of the Living Dummy? It wasn't even about Slappy. And this one is not about the return of any mummy. This is a totally different mummy from the one in the first book, which only makes it 10 times more egregious that he just repainted the same background. This isn't the same tomb. Take a look at some of these pencil sketches that Jacobus did. I know it's not his fault Stine and Scholastic chose this over these, but these are way more visually interesting. The artwork by itself is actually quite good to me, but once it's introduced into the context of a book cover, I suddenly no longer feel like that. This is one of the very, 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 very few books where I actually prefer the 2010 release art. I've hardly even talked about these because 9 out of 10 times I really do not think they hold a candle to the original works. But this one is so much more vibrant and dynamic. I'm still not over that ugly Angry Birds ass font though, and I never will be. It's one of the greatest feelings in the world when your interests happen to overlap with each other. For instance, I love cryptids. They're like my favorite thing. And I love when there are cryptid characters in the media that I like. You'd think since R.L. Stine pulls from so many different avenues of inspiration, that there'd be at least a few books that are cryptid adjacent, but really, there kind of aren't. A Yeti and this werewolf are really all we're gonna get. But R.L. Stine couldn't even give me that. This isn't like a Rougarou cryptid werewolf, this is just a wolf. Honestly, this time, this is just as much Tim's fault as it is Scholastic's or Stine. Dude got the art prompt The Werewolf of Fever Swamp and drew fucking Moon. Something I should really harp on is that TIm Jacobus could paint the goddamn Sistine Chapel for one of these covers and it wouldn't matter if the villain of the week isn't scary. Whether it's a Viking munchkin, an egg, or a dog. That's why I'm giving it a 4 out of 10 for artwork. Like, yes, this is a good painting of a wolf, but it's not a good cover for a book about a werewolf to me. The colors are stunning though, and overall, this is one of the best color schemes we've touched on so far, for sure. But try your best to remember that the artwork score isn't just about a pretty picture, it's about the story the picture tells, the mood it instills in you, the mental image that it conjures, and this is just not really making my neurons fire, I'm sorry. I really don't have much to say about Beware the Snowman. Nothing interesting at least, so I'll keep it quick. Everything about it is mid, except the tagline, which is abysmal. He's got a heart of cold, huh? Yeah, I'm starting to feel that way too. This one is more positive than negative to me though, but honestly, I think that's almost entirely because of how similar this guy looks to the snowman from Courage the Cowardly Dog. Courage is like Goosebumps if it was awesome, and it wasn't the same story 62 different times in 62 different fonts. Another snowman, huh? The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. Something I've been consistently shitting on all these covers for is the colorway not synergizing with the artwork. This time it does, but I'm still gonna shit on it. Just being the colors that are within the artwork is not enough to be effective. You need to compound the two things together. They need to complement each other. The blue is whatever, but it's in my humble opinion that brown should never be the choice. Seriously, dripping brown sludge, do you think that that's gonna make a kid want to pick up your book? Make it pink, make it green, make it blue. Kids like slime. Monster Blood, one of the most famous Goosebumps books ever, was only thought up because Stine saw his kid playing with slime. And I bet it wasn't fucking brown. The 2003 recolor makes it pink and green, which does play off of and complement elements from the piece, giving it a real balance and a harmonic design. Unlike simply color dropping the two most common hues in the painting onto the cover. Every other score it gets is pretty middling. Honestly, the only reason it got a 6 instead of a 5 for artwork is because this is the only cryptid-focused Goosebumps book, which I find totally baffling. How can you write a 62-part series about horror stories taking place in America and not default to a Mothman or a lake monster once? This is pretty much the closest we ever got, and that is such a bummer. I think it's pretty obvious that anybody would be running out of steam when trying to write their 59th book about a kid getting mentally tortured, but crucially always somehow remaining completely unharmed. These books are so samey that a good one should really stand out just from its facade. But this one is called The Haunted School. 0. It's not even a cheap play on words or anything. Bro just gave up. Said fuck it, The Haunted School. Pretty much every time I check the trivia tab of the wiki, my mind is blown for one reason or another. Apparently he got the idea for this one from a group of kids who begged him to write a book about their school, which they thought was haunted. First of all, kid, every school is haunted. And second, quote, despite there being the word haunted in the title, there are no ghosts in this book. Stine? Come on, man. I'm not going to tell you again. You're slipping. Get it together. The painting itself is a 7 though. I think it's got a very classic fundamental Goosebumps look to it. It's uncanny, unsettling, yet all the while so bright. I love how vivid it is, and I love that all the items spilling out of the locker are in grayscale. I never noticed until today that these haunting eyes can be seen deep in the locker, and I prided myself on studying these things pretty close as a kid. The Haunted School isn't bad at all, but it's still not breaking our halfway mark in terms of points possible. I really dig the 2005 recolor though. I also like the German one for how blown out and weirdly scary it is, and the French release is on a whole other level. The Cuckoo Clock of Doom is an incredibly classic cover. Not as iconic as the majority of the ones we'll be discussing in part 2, but still. I was honestly a little shocked to find out that this cover ended up so low. I know people are gonna say, brother, you made the ranking. I know, but the whole point of the scoring system is to make it more objective. It's not my fault this book happens to have a 0 out of 5 tagline, it's some stupid badminton joke. And I know that Tara Webster, pro tag of this book, is not a badminton pro. R.L. Stine just can't help himself but make these shitty puns. Who cares if they make sense or fit the story at all? It's just like, Birdie, get it? Speaking of this book's main character, Tara, she was named after a fan who at some meetup begged Stine to include her in one of his books. Stine ended up obliging the little girl's wish, and the rest is history. It might be because of this that the Cuckoo Clock of Doom is one of the very rare Goosebumps volumes that concludes with a happy ending. I wish this cover could have gotten a happy ending, but it's going to be stuck with 12 points. Do you notice how the lighting on this painting is totally whacked out? There is no consistent source of light in this image. It's like everything is rimlit with this outer glow almost for no reason. But do you also see how it kind of doesn't matter? Simply because Jacobus is bringing that stellar Goosebumps vibe. It's got the flavor.
Good smell. Flavor.
The UK flavor with the U and everything. Too bad the UK cover for this one is horrid. Bollocks, as they might say. Okay, so I already know that I'm gonna get hate for this one, but all good rankings have got at least a few hot takes. I think a lot of people would put the other two camp-centric covers above this one, but to me, this is definitely the strongest of the three. And before you get your panties in a twist about that, remember that these are all really close in score. They're only separated by a few small numbers. Plus, we still haven't found a cover that breaks through the halfway mark for points, at 12.5 out of 25. I'm not a decimal guy, so the horror at Camp Jelly Jam just missed being over the 50th percentile. If this were a tier list, we'd probably be around like a high C at this point. But let me make my case, and play a little defense for this cover that I've seen practically nothing but hate for online. I adore how uncanny this dude looks. Does he look like a normal person with a good perspective, scale, and proportions? Hell no, and that's why it's awesome. Some of you are probably saying, if you like the ugly guy, why don't you like the ugly dog or the ugly cat or whatever else I've been hating? Because this looks purposefully crazy, and this kind of doesn't. Say what you will about his animal portraits, but Jacobus can paint people. Jacobus has the ability to make a person's face radiate with a wonderful glow, but this time he's using those skills to make this dude look wet and like his skin is made of plastic. His eyes are burning, he's unblinking and stiff. The tones of the background are some of the moodiest this series has to offer, and I love the look of the storm rolling in at sunset. The cherry on top of the cake is that the colorway is really pleasant. The tagline, tennis, ping pong, monsters anyone, has got to be one of the most god-awful things I've ever had the misfortune of reading, and honestly now I'm not that beat up about this cover not making it into the top half. Okay, this is not the book that I thought would be the one to crack the halfway mark. I guess before I say anything, how does this one make you feel? A lot of the times, I like checking out other people's rankings online about whatever I'm talking about, not to get ideas on what to say or anything, but just to simply see what the common consensus is. I'm interested in the placements, not the statements. I like to know that my hot takes are hot takes before I say them. Does that make sense? But something I found out very quickly was the very negative sentiments held about this one. Many reviewers putting The Beast of the East firmly in last place because of racism. While yes, giving this amorphous marsupial Asiatic eyes might not have been the most PR-pleasing choice they could have made, I really don't think that this is coming from a place of malice on Jacobus or Stine's part. Asian representation in the American 2000s was just not what it is today, let's just say that. Aside from this, I actually think this cover has the strongest composition of the whole lineup as of yet. The rich colors and the solid build of the image overall make it eye-catching and just kind of fun to look at. To me at least. Compositionally, I really like the bamboo cutting through the frame and him hanging off of it, just gives the piece this really great visual balance, but I'm conflicted. I am not offended by this piece, but I'm also not part of the group that would be offended by it, but none of the international releases were changed. This is how the book was released in China and Japan. Because I feel a little unqualified to totally and properly make any judgment call on this, I honestly feel like the best course of action is just to give it the median 5. The color scheme is really what boosted this thing up to be so high. That purple is one of the most pleasing colors on the spectrum to me. See how effective it can be visually when they just choose the right colors? It's not flawless. That light secondary color could have maybe been a warmer tone to help balance everything out. If you are personally upset about this cover, I'm sorry. Hopefully everyone will agree though that we shouldn't really be needing to discuss race relations in a Goosebumps video. And for that conflict, I think this median spot is really the only place that I feel confident putting it. So, keeping it real, I did not think that this was going to end up so high. Chicken made the halfway mark. That's wild. I really think that that's the beauty of this scoring system. Sometimes it feels slightly out of my control, where I end up with a result that I didn't expect. But then when I look at the scores that I gave it, it all makes sense. Giving things scores can really help you realize truths about the way that you subconsciously versus consciously think about these things, and place said things into categories in your mind. Criticism is a valuable skill, and you're not a hater for having a few suggestions for what could have made something better. But so you don't come across like you don't know what you're saying, you can score things. If it weren't for the way that I've gone about discussing these, I would have no idea how to vocalize my opinions on this cover. But because I have, I can confidently say that the art is okay. It's really not the best, but I do think the sky adds a lot, and the colorway on this one is really close to as good as you can get. And as we know very well by now, animals are not something Jacobus particularly excels in, especially their faces. But he is great at human faces, so of all the Animorph type covers, this is definitely more of a win than the others. Something I am struggling to vocalize though is why exactly this is so much more effective than the Bee one. But it just is. The title's alright, and the tagline is slightly better than the average one. It's a finger-lickin' nightmare is just stupid enough for me to kind of like. There really is like a Goldilocks zone when it comes to being cheesy. It's almost always bad, but sometimes something is so cheesy that it's just kind of the right kind of bad, you know? Chicken is a testament to the fact that the art is just a piece of the puzzle that is the overall cover, and that some good elements can really make or break the total score. I'm going to use volume 39, How I Got My Shrunken Head, as a vehicle to talk about some of these re-release covers. Okay, so by now, you should know the art style of Goosebumps usually involves some sort of totally whacked out point of perspective, and those iconically vibrant colors. This book does both of those things very well. It's even got the Chuck Taylors that we mentioned earlier. Its other scores are mostly pretty solid too, but take a look at the 2003 re-release. Look how they massacred my boy. When you pull this border in so far, you completely lose the entire perspective shift. Something Tim has done countless times over the span of his works is add this checkered floor or checkered ceiling to really push that perspective as far as it can possibly go, to make you feel like you're in a nightmare. Sometimes these 2003 versions are a big upgrade, but in this case, it's clear why we're only taking the OGs into account. A Night in Terror Tower is without a doubt one of the top 10 most iconic Goosebumps covers of all time. This big-backed executioner laboring down these castle stairs is something that's been burned into my memories for decades now. And would you be able to guess that this is one of, if not the most rushed cover Jacobus ever did? The man himself truthfully doesn't like this one much because he had to finish the entire piece in one long, likely pretty miserable 30-hour painting session. If you want my opinion, I think Jacobus may do some of his best work under pressure, because this is pretty great to me. It's got a solid title, pretty good choice of colors, but unfortunately, it's gonna be a LONG night is gonna hold it back from climbing any higher than a 13. And the final entry of part 1, and the 32nd best cover of Goosebumps, is Monster Blood. Monster Blood was the third volume of the series ever to be released, and I think this cover is very important to the success story of the franchise. The simplicity, the stark orange to blue contrast, it's killer. The color scheme is very strong, the glasses and the beastly soup are such a good eye catcher, and it's the perfect amount of creepy for these books. To me, this is a quintessentially effective piece of Goosebumps history. I just wish it didn't have a 0 out of 5 tagline. It's a monster blood drive? For real? A better choice of words here, and this cover could have gotten 19 points instead of 14. Monster Blood eventually went down in Goosebumps as an incredibly influential part of the lineup, garnering 3 sequels, making Monster Blood the longest recurring story in the series. The reason I think that this one went down as so iconic was because of this image. I know that I've been really harsh towards the goop villains, but when you think about it, Goosebumps is goop. Green slime is the main visual motif of this entire IP. And so I guess I do like a good gooper here or there, when I think it's done effectively. And spoiler, Goosebumps does have a lot of wins in that category, with the blob that ate everyone and all 3 Monster Blood sequels, which all wound up being even better than the first one. And the 31st best cover is It Came From Beneath the Sink. If you saw last video, which hopefully you did, then you know that the yellow-red color scheme is not my favorite, to put it lightly, especially here since it really doesn't play well with the painting itself. This is definitely one of those ones that was plussed up in the 2003 re-release, although I gotta say, I do really enjoy the painting itself. If you aren't an artist yourself, it's really hard to explain just how hard it can be when a client asks you to make something baffling and you somehow just gotta pull it off. This is a painting of an evil sponge under the sink, and it's twice as cool as the one about a werewolf. Unlike practically every other cover, Jacobus didn't sign this one, so that really only hints towards how the man himself feels about it, but I happen to like it. One time, a big fan of this one over on Twitter asked Stine, "Did the previous owner of the killer sponge die? Is that why the kids from the family that moved in suddenly became the owners of it?" A valid question. Stine then replied with, "I think you need to get a life." You know what, I was trying to be nice and put some respect on your name in the last video, but fuck you, Stine, you wrinkly mole-covered hairless rat. How dare you speak to one of your own fans with that tone? And all for 300 likes on Twitter. Was it worth it? This dude has 30,000 tweets. If anyone needs to get a life, it's probably the motherfucker who wrote the same book 60 times. The sequel to Say Cheese and Die is gonna wind up taking our 30th place spot. Of all the scores I give out, I gotta say I'm probably the most harsh about the tagline, but think negative, real negative is pretty damn good. I'll give you some props. Something I love is hating on gradient backgrounds. Not many artists like painting backgrounds, so the fact that it's potentially Jacobus' strongest suit makes it really hard to go without. This one I'll let slide because it's both a gradient and a proper background. Nice. The UK version decided to put the background in a background in a background. Don't know what they were smoking because nothing's legal there, but I want some. Something I couldn't help but notice is that in the trivia tab for this one, I saw something that I keep seeing over and over and over. A mention of the removal of the word crazy. Books from the 90s getting censored are kind of common, but I've noticed this a lot. Any mention of a character's ethnicity or weight is entirely removed. And after some research, Stine has never approved one of these changes. Most of the time, I don't really think it matters. I will say though, I am on the side of media preservation. I would rather have something be a problematic teaching tool than get messed with decades later, but the whole crazy thing is really odd to me. Yes, mental health is important, but this is dialogue from children. If a child sees something crazy, they're gonna say, whoa, that's crazy. I know that doesn't really have anything to do with the cover, but I just think it's a little bizarre and worth mentioning. Moving on. Deep Trouble 2 was much cooler in my head. I think that's because as a kid, I always thought the fish was swimming through a forest, really gave it a surreal, otherworldly vibe. But now that I'm re-examining it, these aren't trees, they're coral. That's not a ruin in the snowy woods, it's a shipwreck at the bottom of the sea. It still looks good, but it doesn't have that same surreal nature that I remembered it for. I thought part 2 of this video series would have more of an optimistic tone overall, but I'm not really feeling that way now that we're here. This book is about the Deep siblings. God, that is one of my biggest writing pet peeves. You can give your characters weird names or something that alliterates like Peter Parker, I don't care. But when you name them something that has to do with the title or the plot, it reads like that joke from Eric Andre where he says Thomas Ladder invented the ladder so he could stop stacking rocks to get up so high. Speaking of Peter Parker, the Spider-Man villains are a great example of how much this pisses me off. Like the Big Wheel, who's legally named Axel Wheel. What the hell do you take me for? This is the shortest book in the entire series, so at least that's something to like it for, I suppose. On to another sequel, we have The Haunted Mask 2. I haven't explained this yet, so you might be wondering how I rank something's title when it's a sequel. Well, in my opinion, blank 2 can never really live up to whatever it's following, so I just subtract a point. The Haunted Mask got a 4 out of 5 title, so this one naturally winds up with a 3. I'm sure you'll get more of a feeling for why later, but this one really does not capture the same feeling as the first one. The original color mock-up before this painting went into its final stage was this weird leathery mask instead of this cartoony green one that we wound up with. I personally prefer the original design, but I understand why they changed it. I can't understand though why Jacobus would paint a doormat and not write anything on it. That's a crime. It's Halloween. Write beware or something on there at least. Also, why would a doormat be white? For anyone asking why Jacobus would put details on something he knows won't make it into the final composition, why did he painstakingly paint this washcloth on My Hairiest Adventure then? Maybe he learned his lesson, I don't know. Remember in part 1 when I said how I learned to fly most prominently showed off these Chuck Taylors Jacobus loves to draw so much? Well, this really blows that out of the water. I happen to like this piece quite a bit, but probably my biggest issue is that it doesn't really fit the lineup all too well if you ask me. If I showed you all 4 Monster Bloods, this one definitely stands out. Although they are all vastly different, there's no monster and no blood. I'm sorry to all the Brits of the world, because your Monster Blood 3 is actually the worst thing I've ever fucking seen. What is that even supposed to be? As for the OG, 7, 3, 2, 3, 15. I've got shockingly little to say about Ghost Beach. Despite that, it's got our highest artwork score ever so far with a whopping 8 out of 10. Actually, that feels a little high. Can we give it a 7? Thanks. It's not only well done, but it's classic. I will admit, I do have a bit of an affinity for sheet ghosts. Other than this pretty solid painting though, not much really stands out about Ghost Beach, resulting in yet another 15. I'm honestly pretty upset that Attack of the Mutant didn't wind up higher. Check out the French supervillain. Ugh. UK supervillain? Ew! But the American one. Yeah! The image of a supervillain bounding from his big pink evil headquarters isn't something that I would have ever guessed would be on the cover of a Goosebumps volume, but it's hard to imagine it without this piece now that we've been blessed with it. According to multiple sources, including Stine himself, this book has the greatest twist ending of all of the 62 books. If you're curious, it's that the villain our main character was fighting the whole book isn't actually the Masked Mutant, but some random D-tier villain called the Magnificent Molecule Man. Then the main character's friend, who's been there the whole book, is revealed to actually be the Masked Mutant, who I guess can flawlessly pretend to be a little girl, and I guess spent the whole runtime of the book basically grooming the main character into being his rival. Then the main character cuts himself and bleeds ink and realizes that he's a comic book character, and I'm so bored. There's a reason we're ranking the covers and not the books. I do like the art, but unfortunately this one gets held back a little by all its other scores, and only manages to get by with 15. 10 points from perfect. At our 24th spot is the 4th volume of the series, Say Cheese and Die. Now that's a 5 out of 5 title. Let's go over the cover quickly before I go on like 5 different tangents here. This one has a little bit of a strange story behind it. So Jacobus sent in his sketches of the skeletal family portrait, but there was 2 problems. One, just 3 volumes prior, in the very first book of the series, there was a character who had a dream that their whole family were skeletons. Jacobus didn't know that because he didn't care to read these things, and I don't blame him. If that weird coincidence wasn't enough though, the second issue is that there really wasn't anything like that in this book. That never would have been a problem for the other covers, but for some reason Scholastics really cared this time. But instead of making Jacobus start all the way over, Stine just went back in and included a second skeleton dream, just in the first 4 books. The last thing I have to say about this cover is that the United Kingdom version is actually pretty sweet. Most of the time, no offense, the UK GBAT knows nothing but fumbles. Something I can't not mention is that the Goosebumps episode inspired from this book, episode 15, has ended up going down in history as quite important because it kickstarted a little somebody's career.
Let's see it. Come on, let me see it.
Oh, it's a new process. It doesn't develop right away.
While we're here, I gotta use this opportunity to plug the Ryan Gosling tier list, which I made last year with Ryan Gosling himself. If you're interested in hearing me and the man behind the movies rank his whole filmography, I'll leave a link to the video right in the description. But that video would have never existed if it weren't for this role, where he plays Greg Banks. Speaking of Greg, that's the name of one of my patrons who I unfortunately forgot to shout out last video. Don't know what happened there, probably a ghost or something if I had to guess, but thank you to my patrons for allowing me to do what I do. Greg, Hoops McCann, Noisy Pitta, Nat, and Jaguar. And Lolquak, who in my last video commented, "Goosebumps? The only goose I want to bump into is Ryan Gosling." Me too, buddy. Me too. Head over to Jallomoth.com if you want to be up there with them as a part of Jallo history. And without further ado, let's move on to number 23. If you want to argue with me directly about these placements, the best way to do that would probably be to join my Discord server, which will be linked to you-know-where. Fair warning though, you'll have to deal with my moderators, like Quander, and this one is his favorite, so good luck. He pointed out to me that the color scheme makes it look like the header is actually the beach, which isn't something I had noticed, but I appreciate it now that I have. I may not be as infatuated with it as he is, but I do really like it. Pretty Jaws-esque composition with a hammerhead and objectively cooler shark, come on. Although I'm still not over the fact that this book is about a kid named Billy Deep. That doesn't really have an effect on its scoring, but it does affect me, strangely, and that makes me kind of upset. Nothing about Deep Trouble blows my mind or anything, but it's overall a very solid addition to the series. While I was doing research for Don't Go to Sleep, I found something on the Goosebumps wiki called Don't Sit on the Gronk. What is that? What does it mean? What significance does it hold? I don't know. I'm not brave enough to venture that deep into the Goosebumps rabbit hole, I'm sorry. I don't really have any fun trivia or anything this time, but what we do have is an incredibly solid cover. You'd be truly hard-pressed to find a better example of that perspective we've all come to know and love. We can see 5 faces of this room at once. That's impressive. As an artist, I gotta say the perspective on the kid in bed, wonderful. I would not even want to attempt that. This Eva color scheme isn't perfect, but it's good. The colors of the piece itself are what really stands out. The purple sky, the striking blue that everything is cast in, and that explosion of orange on the left side of the frame with no explanation. Is it the light of the lightning illuminating the room? Is this 4-fingered freak under the bed radiating? I don't know, and that's the best part. I tend to not like when these pieces are asymmetrical or unbalanced, but this one really strikes a good balance there. No pun intended, that wasn't even really a pun. This feels like a nightmare in the best way possible. So far, there's been a pretty wide disparity between the scores these things get, but The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb is the beginning of our 17 gauntlet. 4 covers received a score of 17. It's one of the most popular scores by far, and of all of them, this is just my personal least favorite. But for the next few entries, remember that these are all kind of interchangeable, and just because this one drew the short end of the stick does not mean it's bad in any way. I really love the richness of the artwork. The colors were so deep you could swim in them. I mean, that's what the UK mummy's doing. But for real, this is like dark chocolate, and the other mummy one is like milk or white chocolate. In other words, shit. For real though, what is the obsession with the British versions of these all floating in a pile of goop? Really makes them all feel kind of samey. And let's be honest, the books already do that themselves. I love it when certain countries just completely blow the image out for no reason. The Russian and German ones are shocking to look at. Maybe it just really cranks up the nostalgia for me, but man do I love it. The bisexual lighting on this thing goes so hard. Represent. Up next, we've got Monster Blood 2. I swear I feel like I'm the only person on the planet to get a kick out of Monster Blood. I can't find anything but hate for this one online. 1 had blood but no monster, and 3 didn't have either. This one is better than both of those because it combines the fear of that alien ooze with this weird inflation thing that this series has gotten itself into. While perusing the international releases, as you do, I scrolled past the usual suspects. You know, the UK cover, French, Italian, German, Dutch, yada yada. Then at the bottom was Afrikaans, which was a language I wasn't even familiar with. For those curious, it's spoken in South Africa. But what really stood out to me is that these books are called grillers there. Thanks, Goosebumps Wiki, for letting me know about a language I had never encountered in my 400 million years of life. Goes to show that you're never too old to learn. I'm not sure why this is the first time I'm seeing this though. Not every wiki page has every release. I think it only shows what's been scanned, so I've got no clue if this was the only book to release in South Africa, or if the others just haven't been scanned and uploaded, or what. My opinion on the artwork is unusually high. I say unusually because do 1 minute of research and you'll find no shortage of haters for this one. I really do dig it. I like how simplistic and effective the top and bottom of the image are. It really focuses your view right to the center. Grillers. Man, that's so cool. Okay, I'm definitely gonna get some shit for this. A lot of people really don't like this one because of these ugly slug monsters, but like, did they forget what series they're reading? These aren't exactly supposed to be cute. Finding bugs in your bathroom is such a universal fear that this one just can't not be effective, don't lie. This is, believe it or not, the final installment of not just the monster bloodline, but Goosebumps. This is book 62. So many people think they ended on an impossibly low point, but what is there to hate about this? Good artwork, a flawless color scheme, a delightfully stupid tagline. The only thing that's really getting snubbed here is the title, because like I said earlier, I subtract 1 point per sequel, so this one was kind of doomed on that front to begin with. I think Monster Blood 4 was a great way for the series to go out. This really acts as a bit of a send-off for the series. Many of the characters in this book being people who were featured in older volumes. And for the big special Monster Blood finale, this time the blood is blue instead of green.
Why are you blue?
A small detail, but a welcome one. Someone, please, if you hate this, tell me why. And it better not be slugs equal gross, because that does not count. I really can't say much about Werewolf Skin that you couldn't have guessed already. It's got 17 points, a rather good set of colors, and it's mildly cryptid adjacent, so you know I'm gonna like it. This is one of the only 3 of the original books that never received a re-release in the 2010s. It really isn't that odd though, because all 3 were the 3 final books, the newest ones. I would have guessed just by appearance that this one was older though. It's got a classic GB feel to it. Apparently before this book was released, it was originally going to be called I Want to Be a Werewolf for Halloween. I'm glad they didn't go with that because I'm not even sure how they would have fit that on the cover. And it sounds so stilted. This is probably something that no sane human should or would ever know or care about for that matter, but I swear to God, almost all of these books have some sort of reference to Jell-O. There are some things that just happen to sneak their way into many of these books. Nintendo, Indiana Jones, stuff that 90s kids would have been intimately aware of. But the thing I see more than anything else, by far, is Jell-O. I don't know if Stine was just a freak for the stuff or what, but I am continually baffled when I scroll down to my 40th wiki article in a row that says this book references Jell-O. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm struggling to think of the right word to accurately describe the ghost next door. There's nothing really wrong with it. Got the tiled floor in there to accentuate the shifting perspective, not only 1, not 2, but 3 Converse shoes, and hey, he finally wrote something on the welcome mat. I even like the title, tagline, and this sort of bizarre color scheme. I think it's a little ugly, but in all the right ways, like a grandma's couch. But what this cover is lacking is flavor. It's quintessential in a way. It hits every beat I feel like it should, but it's just missing the X factor. Maybe it's because there's no central monster, but that isn't what this book is about, and it did just about as good as it could without having some evil creature center page. Go Eat Worms. Perfect title, perfect color scheme, bad tagline, and some pretty good art. This is one of those hot takes that I don't exactly understand. Maybe I just like bugs and worms and stuff, but man, there is no shortage of slander for Go Eat Worms here on the interwebs. This book was reprinted this year and kept the old art. Because whether you like worms or not, I think this is undoubtedly effective. Worms are some of the least scary bugs to me, and that's probably because they aren't bugs. Well, some of them are. This isn't a joke at all. Worm is literally just a word scientists use to describe things that are worm-like. There are microscopic worms, and there are 200-foot long worms deep in the ocean. Neither of them have anything to do with each other biologically, but are both pretty creepy. Some of them are very pretty though. There are over 20,000 types of worms out there, many of which not even being within the same classification of animal. and scientists think there could be up to 2,000 more types we haven't discovered. Oops, I read that wrong. 20,000. Just kidding, it's 200,000. Man, I love Earth. What I'm trying to say is that if you're a worm hater, I'm not sure that this is a safe space for you. Jacobus has come out and said that if he could redo this one, he would have, and would have made one big worm bust out of the page in the middle with some horrendous face. First of all, Tim, worms don't really have faces. And second, I think that would have really detracted from the horror of all these tiny, mindless critters en masse. I'm glad the cover was released the way it was. Glad enough to reward it with 18 points. Spoiler, but it looks like there's going to be even more 18s than 17s. Remember in part 1, way back when we were talking about Be Careful What You Wish For, I said that there were but 2 covers in the entire run that Jacobus didn't make illustrations for. There was that one and this one. Volume 2, Stay Out of the Basement. This cover really makes you wonder what the series would have been like if it weren't for TIm Jacobus being practically the sole illustrator. What had happened is that they gave both TIm Jacobus and Jim Thiessen a cover to illustrate, Volume 1 and Volume 2. They liked the feeling of Jacobus's more, so went with him. It was a smart move, but it makes you think, what if they had employed both of these men? As this very video that you're watching right now will tell you, I also prefer Welcome to Deadhouse over Stay Out of the Basement. But check this out. In 2003, when the covers went from this border to this border, they had Jacobus re-illustrate Stay Out of the Basement. And to be totally honest, I massively prefer Jim Thiessen's piece. Sure, the perspective and bright colors may be absent, but it's just as vivid and creepy as many of Jacobus's pieces, if not most of them. It makes me dream of a world where both of these men could have illustrated the series together. If they took turns, they would have both had twice the time to finish each piece. Scholastics likely didn't do this because who wants to hire 2 people when you can get away with hiring 1, which I understand. If they had to go with one of them, I'm glad it was Tim, but Jim's cover is nothing to scoff at. In fact, it's the 15th best cover. My favorite thing about it is the vague terror of it. As a kid, you have no idea what this plant man emerging from the basement could possibly be. It's beyond vivid, and it really makes the imagination run wild. It tells 1,000 words. Meanwhile, Jacobus's cover tells you 2 words, plant dude. It's all front and center and doesn't really leave much room for imagination. Like I said, I understand why they did what they did, but if they would have just coughed up some more dough, they could have employed 2 great artists, making the job much easier and less stressful for them both, and producing a wider, more varied range of pieces. Although, who knows if Goosebumps would have reached its same heights if it weren't for each and every piece Jacobus made. Like number 14. I think this cover may have been designed in a lab specifically for me. I'm a big fan of creepy stares, I like that there's a central eye-catching figure, they're feeding into my blue and orange obsession, and the color scheme literally looks like you juiced me. I can't tell if I'm easy or hard to appeal to. Either way, this one's a win, and that's all there is to say. Thank you for making one of these books about something scary. I get you were trying with the dolls and the ghosts and stuff, but this is what I wanted. I think this one could have easily been a top 10 if there weren't a few missteps taken during its conception. First of all, I might as well be known as the McDonald's slasher at this point for how much I want to kill this red and yellow color scheme, but I will say it's ever so slightly more appropriate here. This may just be the Midwesterner in me, but a scarecrow in the middle of a cornfield really is the stuff of nightmares on the wrong kind of night. I just wish that the scarecrow himself looked cooler, scarier. I've mentioned these books before, but let's take a quick look at Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark's depiction of a scarecrow. This is Harold, and he's fucking terrifying. This book, which is also for kids, came out a decade before Goosebumps and is just so much scarier. I attribute that to how human he looks. He's really slotted quite well into that uncanny valley, and that very inhuman pose really sells how bizarre and unsettling the design is. With a creepier scarecrow and a set of some better colors, this book could have been a contender for the best there ever was. And even with its flaws, it's our 13th best. Finally breaking free from our gauntlet of 18s, we have Let's Get Invisible, which, as you can probably guess, got 19. It may be kind of strange to you that this one got so high, especially since it doesn't have a creepy monster, the crazy perspective is missing, it's not very vibrant. What gives? What gives is that this might be the most technically impressive thing Jacobus has ever painted. So far, this is bar none the best human Tim has ever put to canvas. He's so lifelike that when I was a kid, I probably thought this was a photo. Drawing a person in a mirror isn't easy, and neither is using acrylic and airbrush paints to make a kid in a mirror with his opacity turning down. This is a feat of artistry, and while it may not be as vibrant as the rest, it's no less vivid. The texture of the wood, his clothing, his hair, his skin, it's all really, really impressive. This one, to me, clearly, was not spat out in a week like some of the lower end covers. Before I had even checked, I guessed to myself that this one had to have come in the first 6 books before the series was as serialized and as expansive as it was, and what do you know? Volume 6. He probably had weeks to do this one, and it really shows. Whoever made the color scheme really understood it and made it this calm, muted color. And it's got one of the ever so rare taglines that I actually like. There's actually nothing that I don't like about this cover. Also, orange and blue. I'm a sucker for this shit. My insect brain cannot contain my love for this combination. A fun fact about this one is that the cobwebs in the painting weren't done by Jacobus. Apparently, someone at Scholastics thought the image was missing something and added these into the composition themselves. Now, normally I wouldn't condone that sort of guerrilla collaboration, but I gotta say, it does add to the piece. Rare Scholastics W. Welcome to the top, king of the goopers, the blob that ate everyone. This is, maybe even more so than the rest of my takes, very subjective. But I think this is one of the most iconic artworks Jacobus has ever spawned. Many of these books' plots have something to do with some sort of strange real-world object. Tanning lotion that turns you into a dog, a camera that turns you into a skeleton, and in this book's case, it's a typewriter that brings to life whatever you write on it. So basically that Smosh video that's older than half of you. Unfortunately, this typewriter falls into the hands of a little troublemaker who likes scary stories. And now there's a blob that eats everyone. First of all, 5 out of 5 title. It ate everyone. That's awesome. In the book The Art of Goosebumps, which I somehow have not brought up once, Jacobus said this piece was in the top 10 artworks of the entire series to him easily. And not only do I understand, I agree. Too bad we aren't ranking the artworks, because then this wouldn't have missed a spot in the top 10. Unfortunately, it missed it by that much. If you want to know what held it back, it's the slightly better than mid color scheme and the slightly worse than mid tagline. While this big, pink, veiny, gummy freak may not have graced us with a spot in the top 10, he got as close as you can get, and earns a special place in my heart. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. We've finally made it. The top 10 Goosebumps covers. And what better place to start than the beginning? When looking at Welcome to Deadhouse, it's ever so clear to me why Scholastics and Stine chose Jacobus for these works. Orange and blue? I'm there. Creepy stairs? I'm there. Pink colorway? Count me in. Creepy details? I'm taking a number. Legitimately threatening tagline? How can it get better than this? It will just kill you. That is the greatest tagline in all of Goosebumps. Nothing higher or lower than this will ever top, it will just kill you. There's something so sinister about this figure in the window calmly closing the curtains while the door to the house is just open. This may be another Midwestism, but every kid has that one house on their block that they may not even really want to look at for too long. The house that you never see anyone come in or out of. The one you stare into the windows of, waiting to see something that you could never forget. This preys on a child's fears in all of the ways that it should. It's not only effective, but it's the catalyst for everything that we've discussed up to this point. You know what? Why don't I read an excerpt from the Goosebumps wiki? Because I think they word it very succinctly. The first word of this book is Josh. This book being the first Goosebumps book. And its first word being Josh means that the first word ever in a Goosebumps book was Josh, and the first letter was J. Is that actually on the wiki? What's happening? I've been reviewing these for so long. Am I going crazy? Wait, am I in a Goosebumps book? Oh no, if that's the case, I'm gonna get retconned for saying the word crazy. Let's move on before I turn into a weremoth or a pile of mothster's blood or something else poorly written. And the 9th best Goosebumps cover is Calling All Creeps. The first and most scathing review I'm gonna give is what's up with the gray? I'm surprised I've had to scold these people for gray slime twice now. But this time it really hurts because the painting is so fire. Speaking of fire, the main character of Calling All Creeps is named Ricky Beamer. Billy Deep and Ricky Beamer are on the opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of etymological badassery. If you're waiting for me to say anything else about the contents of this cover, you're shit out of luck. Dinos equal 20 points. And the 8th best Goosebumps cover is The Haunted Mask. There are only 2 covers in this entire series that I think match The Haunted Mask's level of clout. Night of the Living Dummy, and one that we'll be discussing rather shortly. This book and everyone after it are nearly flawless. It only missed 1 point per category. The only score that I really feel like warrants a discussion though is the artwork score, which, as you may have guessed, I can't give a 10 because of the lack of a background. In my heart of hearts, I just think of Jacobus as a background painter. If you went to a master burger chef's house and he made you a delicious 9-course meal, it doesn't matter how good everything is. If he doesn't make you a burger, his staple, something will feel missing. A Jacobus artwork with no backgrounds is like a moth with no wings. Oh, shit, wait. There may be no larger disparity in quality than the gorge between Jacobus's piece and the 2011 version though. They rang out every drop of flavor that this cover had. If anything though, it makes me appreciate Tim's work even more. This is trying too hard and simultaneously not trying at all. Not being able to take off your Halloween mask is yet another low-hanging fruit when it comes to childhood fears. Because of that very specific fear, as a kid, I could not trick-or-treat as anything with a mask. If I was something that required a mask, I would either paint my face or just not wear it and get made fun of. Those kinds of fears are what draw kids in. It clearly worked. I really do love the Haunted Mask. And the 7th best Goosebumps cover is Phantom of the Auditorium. This cover got yet another whopping 9 for its artwork. What held it back from a 10? Personal preference. Like I just made abundantly clear, I think Jacobus is an environmental painter at heart, and this one is lacking a little bit in that department. I will say, this is my second favorite cover without an extravagant background. It's simple, yet very effective. Something definitely worth praise here is that this is the best character design in Goosebumps history. As a character artist myself, I gotta say that this is truly, by far, the greatest Jacobus has ever done. I mean, to me. The Masked Mutant, Slappy, the Haunted Masks, nothing really comes close to the adoration I feel for the Phantom of the Auditorium's design. So I'm sure you can imagine how much it hurt when my heart was shattered into a billion pieces when I clicked on the 2011 version and saw this flavorless, whitewashed mess. How are you gonna whitewash him and give him a Doom mask? That's a hate crime. A top 3 color scheme and some really solid scores thankfully kept Phantom of the Auditorium inside the top 10. And the 6th best Goosebumps cover is The Girl Who Cried Monster. Remember when I said that Let's Get Invisible has the greatest portrait of a human in this entire lineup? Well, this one gives that old thing a run for its money. And I'm not talking about this terrifying guy. I mean her. This is a painting, not a digital piece. Jacobus couldn't zoom in to etch away at all those tiny details. The portrait of this girl was just done at an impressively small scale. This book really feels like the inverse of Jim Thiessen's Stay Out of the Basement. Instead of a monster opening the door to our world, this girl is opening the door to a monster. Everything from the glow of the man's skin under the harsh artificial light, the individual hairs on his arm, every single book in the background being painstakingly painted for hours and hours. The detail on display here is immaculate, but the detailing isn't what earned this art a 10. That would be the stellar composition. Purple and red may be 2 of the most famously difficult colors to make work together, and Jacobus makes it look like child's play. The blood red behind our main character deep in the doorway is one of my favorite elements of any of these covers. And I cannot even fathom why I see so much ambivalence or straight up disdain for this cover in other people's lists. I'd go as far to say that if you dislike this cover, you may just simply not get Jacobus's art. This is our very first perfect 10 out of 10 artwork. Every cover from this point on will receive a 10. We have entered the Hall of Fame. And the 5th best Goosebumps cover has been right here next to me this whole time. Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns. For every video where I talk about something new on this channel, I add an additional item to my room here. So why did I choose to curate Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns? Firstly, because I couldn't spoil the number 1 spot by sitting it right next to me the whole video. And second, it's because Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns has my vote for the most iconic cover there ever was. We're really to the point where the grain of salt you need to take is a brick of the stuff. These top spots really come down to personal preference, more so than the rest. But I don't think that there's any way for this one not to at least be in your top 10. It gets, of course, a perfect artwork score, and nearly perfect in everything else. I think it's absolutely wild that this book was the 48th volume ever released, when from the looks of it, it seems to be so early. It just feels so classic, so quintessential. Despite that vibe, this book potentially, more than any other, was subject to a myriad of changes. Mentions of fat people have been removed, the main character's dad calling somebody a roly-poly was removed, African American was changed to brown skin, and one character's Halloween costume has a mention of black face paint, which I'm sure you can guess why that one was changed. These books are very censored, but almost always kind of just sloppily written also. I don't know if any of these wiki pages don't mention some sort of typo or 10. It's like these things weren't proofread at all. Quotation marks are missing, names are misspelled, hell, the title of this one was. I don't exactly know where I'm going with all of this, but all in all, thank God I decided to judge these books by their covers and not their contents. Over the course of the series, my respect for Jacobus has only risen, but my respect for Stine has fallen a bit. It's kind of fitting that he's called the Stephen King of children's horror, because man, do I hate that guy too. Whenever I mention disliking someone in my videos, like Elon Musk or Stephen King or Rebecca Sugar, I get so many comments that are like, what's so bad about this person? Believe it or not, the website you're on right now is owned by a company called Google. I feel like people kind of forget that a lot. Why don't you do your own research? Alright, enough pessimism, let's keep going. And the fourth best Goosebumps cover is Piano Lessons Can Be Murder. The next 3 covers only miss a single point each. So which category held Piano Lessons Can Be Murder from greatness? The color scheme. Something about this pale blue and deep maroon just doesn't sit right with me. It's like that puzzle piece that you know fits next to the others but wasn't machined correctly, and so it's a little wobbly. I understand why they chose these colors, but I know that it could have been better, and so that's why this receives a 24 of 25. You might be surprised at my 10 out of 10 artwork score, as there's no background, just a simple gradient. Something that I've done my fair share of complaining about. But there's just something about this one, it's perfect. Any sort of background would have detracted from the composition. The unpleasant gradient is, for the first time, fully welcome. The perspective that you would be missing from the background is elegantly displayed in the piano itself. This is striking. Perhaps much less scary than many of the others, but I'm willing to chalk that up to subjectivity. Now, if we were ranking the 2003 covers, which would be stupid, this one may even take the cake. Flipping the art and dropping that blue in really brings it all together. And for the first time, this tight border doesn't upset me because there's no background to spite. I made some sort of joke earlier about the UK cover artists being on hard drugs, and yeah, yep. In the trivia tab, the wiki says the twist at the end of this book is very minor compared to other Goosebumps stories, in which Jerry brings up how everyone on the baseball team says he has great hands, similar to what Dr. Shriek said about his piano playing. First of all, Dr. Shriek, Stine, you have lost all my respect. I hate you. And second of all, wiki people, that is not a twist, like, in any way. What's going on? And the third best Goosebumps cover is How to Kill a Monster. This was, is, and will be the hottest take in the video. I don't know why, but it seems like I may be the only one hopelessly in love with this cover. To me, it's another 24. So where did this one falter? Once again, the colorway. I think if they brought the saturation up, it could have brought this to a flawless score. I see so many people give this one a middling review, and more than any other, I just don't get it. Color contrast, central yet vague monster, stellar perspective, a detailed background, what is there not to like? Back at the very beginning of part 1 of this series, I said the tagline was more important than you'd think, and that the very best taglines have somewhat of a setup and punchline dynamic with the title. First of all, any children's book with the words "how to kill" in the title is instantly perfect. But second, here's the setup and punchline. How to kill a monster. Step 1, run. Step 2, run faster. Is it funny? No. Does it make any sense? Also no. But it's threatening and intriguing. The tagline really sells that helplessness, and that's scary. That's Goosebumps. This cover is Goosebumps. This is the most quintessential volume in the lineup, and I'm the only one who cares. Before moving on, I will briefly mention a change that caught my attention. This is a quote from the book. Everyone they tell the story to will think they're nuts is changed to everyone they tell the story to will think they're joking. I think Scholastics really was like scared shitless that these books were going to get them canceled or something. As someone pretty damn mentally ill myself, anyone who's crazy enough to get offended by words like crazy, nuts, and bonkers are probably so crazy that you shouldn't take them too seriously. Now, using words like schizo and autistic in a derogatory manner is wrong. That's messed up. But something as broad as crazy used in an abstract sense, that's not offensive. Maybe that's ableist of me, and I'm not woke enough to be able to tell. I mean, good on them for breaking mental health stigma and whatnot, but I really don't think kid calling a hypothetical person nuts is something worth changing a book over. English teachers all over the US make kids read the N-word in Huckleberry Finn, and meanwhile the word nuts is too much? Maybe this is an odd take, but even if it's offensive, just leave it. Oh, well, what about the reprints? Don't reprint them. Stop censoring these books. Stop changing them at all. Stop giving them new covers every 10 years. Let this shit die. Let it be a product of its time. Stop changing Walkman to iPod to iPhone and just give up. These books would keep selling with no changes at all, and that's something I know. I honestly bet they lost a shit ton of money reprinting these and hiring new artists. Don't change old media. Let books be challenging. Fuck George Lucas for changing Star Wars, and fuck Scholastics for changing these books. I would love to blame Stine, but like I've made very clear, he did not approve any of these changes. and I'd love to call that based, but it's his series. He could easily tell them to just stop, but it's too profitable for him to do that. And at this point in his career, he doesn't want to lift a goddamn finger. I mean, come on, how could he hire The Rock and Kevin Hart and Jack Black for his next shitty movie? And the second best Goosebumps cover is One Day at Horrorland. First of all, you can already tell from context clues that this is going to be a 10 out of 10 piece of art. If you don't, then you weren't listening, your problem, but just in case you need me to spell it out, roller coasters, scary monster, creepy tree. 10. Normally, you wouldn't catch me dead defending a pink and blue color scheme, but it's like cotton candy. Thematic. 5. The title is another 5. I love that implication behind the one day at Horrorland. That's nice. So obviously, the spot that didn't fully deliver is the tagline. Enter if you dare. Thematic? Yeah. Appropriate? Yep. Flavorful? No. I can't justify giving that a 5. I'm sorry. But I think where this book's X factor really comes in is just how important it is to the lore and the fan base. You want to know what got me into Goosebumps as a kid? Picking the books up off the shelves and marveling at the artwork. You want to know what got me into the Goosebumps fandom as a kid? Horrorland. The difference of people being a fan and being in the fandom might seem trivial, but to a business, the difference is millions of dollars. You want to get people hooked. It's the reason that I and many others were a part of the Goosebumps fan club back in the day. And the real spark for many of us was Horrorland. It's one of Stine's absolute favorites, and you can tell. It's just so obvious that this had passion behind it, something you can't say about most of these books. I was always kind of torn as a kid. You could say I'm kind of a thrill seeker, but not much of a thrill chaser. I didn't and don't like haunted attractions, but I've always loved horror and roller coasters. The idea of a theme park run by monsters where terror is lurking behind every corner is awesome. If this place was real, going here as a kid probably would have fixed me. There are scream parks, as they're known in real life, but nothing comes even close to capturing the magic of a child's imagination of Horrorland. Okay, we're finally here. We're standing at the precipice. We're about to know once and for all, what is the best Goosebumps cover of all time? Good thing for this scoring system, right?
Wrong!
I've thrown it away. I've cast aside all that I hold sacred because my number one cover didn't earn a 25, or a 24, or a 23. But it's my favorite, so it's the best. Volume 56, The Curse of Camp Cold Lake. Sarah. I remember the main character's name, Sarah Moss. I haven't read this book in 10 years. Thank God this book was ghostwritten because Stine could never make something so iconic. There is nothing as vivid in this series as The Curse of Camp Cold Lake. I was a kid in Boy Scouts who did not want to be in Boy Scouts. I did not want to go to summer camp with a bunch of strangers. I did not want to be in the woods. I did not want to swim in a freezing cold algae-infested, nasty, slimy lake. I had never related to a book so much. There's a scene in this book, this moment, that I've never been able to forget. Sarah swims out to the middle of the lake and pretends to drown because she's jealous and wants attention. Such a realistically childish thing to do. But when she goes underwater, she can't find her way back up. The book vividly, and I mean vividly, describes Sarah's drowning. The tightness in her lungs, the struggle to find her way back up, the yellow and purple dots scattered across her clouded vision as she is strangled by the lake. She does eventually fight her way to the top, but when she surfaces, everyone is gone. It's no longer summer. It's the dead of winter, and she's the only person at the entire camp. This video is about the covers, but when I see this image, I get scared a little bit because of its contents. Not because it's a scary face, but because children do not like to feel helpless. It's truly the scariest thing that there is. Not even the unknown is scarier than a loss of agency. The Curse of Camp Cold Lake is the only volume that makes me feel childlike vulnerability. And entirely independent of that, it also happens to have the most striking and my favorite artwork of all 62 books. While I was researching for this project, I stumbled upon TIm Jacobus' website and found out that he's selling signed prints of a select few of these works. And in my shock, one of the ones up on his site is this one. I couldn't help myself, and a few days later, it's here. And it's one of my favorite purchases that I've ever made. I am beyond excited to have this piece of Goosebumps history curated in my collection. If you'd like to support Jacobus and charity, go pick yourself up one of these prints like I did. I'm not sponsored or anything, but I don't need to be. If you're a superfan, he even sells original pencil sketches. And like I said, much of the profits from these sales go directly to charity. God bless you, Jacobus. Go support the man. If you'd like to support me for some strange reason, first of all, thank you. I cannot appreciate my patrons enough. And second, you can go to Jallomoth.com to do so. Thank you for watching. And stay curious.